As one of my winter projects this year, 2015, I've decided to collect bird nests at Spobikimi and take them apart and analyze them, try to learn which plants are important to which birds, and learn something more about the strategies that these birds use when constructing their nests, why they choose the plants that they do. So I started out week one of winter, first winter moon, Itotstoi, with a catbird nest, a nest that I knew functioned well over the summer, that I watched a catbird raise hatchlings in successfully. And so this was the nest. It was situated in a bullberry bush. You can see the size of the nest in comparison to my pair of tweezers at the side, and that pair of tweezers is about your average size, pair of drugstore cosmetic tweezers. I think the nest is pretty close to about the size of a robin's nest, but made quite differently. Inside the nest, you can see that there's some litter here. And I'll show you what that's composed of in a minute. When I turn the nest upside down, this is what it looks like. It's coated on the bottom with mostly skeletonized cottonwood leaves. Anyhow, let's get into the deconstruction of what I learned. So inside the nest, the litter that you saw in there was mostly these leaves and a couple of berries from the bulberries themselves. These, I take it, just fell in as we've gone into the season when the leaves fall. These just were shed by the tree that the nest was in itself and made its way in there. It's important to note, however, that I did not find in the litter inside the nest any sign of bird droppings at all, nor any egg shell fragments. All of these things are carried away by mama catbird, possibly papa catbird, I'm not sure, during the time of raising their brood. So this is just leaf litter alone, nothing else, nothing left by the catbirds themselves. And despite what I first thought when I saw the berries, I don't think that any mice have made any use of this nest. There was no mouse droppings. None of the berries looked like they'd been bitten by mice. And there was only a couple of berries anyway. It wasn't a food cache for sure. So this was the stuff inside, just nature's offerings. When I go back to the nest itself, I find that it's initially separable into kind of two nests. It's hard to see it here, but there is an inner nest and an outer nest. The inner nest and an outer nest. Now you can see it more clearly when I pull out the inner nest. This is what it looks like whole, but it's very separable. I was easily able to pull the inner nest out, and the inner nest on the right hand side here was composed of different material than the material surrounding it. So looking at what that material was, this is here the inner nest before I started pulling it apart, and you see there's three thicker pieces of fiber in the bottom of the nest. There's at least three thick pieces of fiber. I don't think that those are actually, well, they're obviously they're part of the inner nest, but I think that they are more associated with the kind of the outer nest material. The inner nest material largely was rootlets, I should say. small little spindly, skinny little pieces of root. You can see up in the top right hand corner, some pieces were very small, and other pieces were quite long. I don't know if the very small pieces broke off of pieces that were quite long to begin with. I counted about 80 pieces as I put these together in a pile and bagged them separately. I'm going to drop some of these into some water and let them sit in water and see if by any chance whatsoever any of them still have capacity to grow a new plant, so I can figure out what plant this is very easily in that respect. This may be the roots of several different kinds of plants, although they look very similar. If the water soaking experiment doesn't work, I'm still going to try to look around in the area of the nest on the ground level and see if I can find rootlets that seem to match under inspection by at least a hand lens, something like that. So anyway, the inner nest, the inner lining of the nest, where the eggs, where the hatchlings actually are raised, is made out of these rootlets. Why is an important question. I don't know why, but I hope to learn. So then I turned the nest over and I started pulling off the skeletonized cottonwood leaves that made up the first layer of the nest. As the nest was actually being built, this would have been the first layer set down in the little crook of the bullberry bush to form a pad on which to build a nest. And this was all skeletonized cottonwood leaves, except for, you see on the left-hand side, a piece of plastic that I think came from a somewhat degraded plastic bag. Just a really thin piece of plastic that was much like the leaves themselves. It's probably mistaken for a leaf by the birds. And that was integrated in, and it was part of it. There was approximately 30 leaves set down to form the bottom of this nest. Again, why this material? Well, perhaps it just makes a good base to build on, or there may be some other reason. There may be some other, like maybe it holds in heat better when you have this kind of a layering on the bottom. I don't know. But again, these are the kind of things that I'd like to learn. But certainly this at least is one identifiable plant, cottonwood leaves, that the catbird is using. Inside of that, I find, like the next layer up from the leaves, I find this thick fibrous material, kind of woody and dense. And that's the same stuff that you see right here. There's a couple of pieces integrated in with the rootlets. Same kind of material, thick fibery stuff. Obviously taken from some brush, some bush or tree of some kind. I'm not sure what as yet. Inside of that is the bulk of the material that the outer nest is made of. And this is probably, I don't know. I lost count. I think there was at least 80 pieces of this thinner fiber material. I don't know if this is the same plant as what makes up the thicker material. I think so, but I'm not sure. So I immediately suspected that this material was made of buckbrush, and the reason I suspected that is because inside of this material there was also a few twigs here and there, and I went out today, in fact, and collected some buckbrush tips and some buckbrush bark, and the buckbrush tips, the twigs, matched with these twigs that were inside of the nesting material. So at least some of this is buckbrush for sure. But the bark stuff, this stuff, I don't think much of this is. Perhaps, but it didn't match when I brought my piece of buckbrush bark home. My piece was much more thinner, delicate material than this stuff. So I suspect actually that this comes from a different plant. I'm going to keep searching until I find one that I feel like matches this and this. To figure it may just come from the bullberry brush itself. I mean, that would be an obvious suspect as well, but it would have to be one of a certain age, because I think the older bullberry brush bark is way too craggy, and you wouldn't be able to pull off pieces like this, and the younger trees are way too smooth. So it's got to be something in between if it is. This reminds me of like cedar bark, but there's no kind of trees, anything like that, anywhere around. And so, and I think this is the same material but thinner. So I'm going to have to, and on some of these pieces, you even get little pieces of the wood or cambium along with the bark. So I'm going to have to keep looking, keep searching, try to figure out what this material is, but it is the bulk of the nest, the large outer nest material. That's what it's made of. And there was some mildewing and stuff like that was going on with it. But yeah, you can see here, it's definitely not a grass or anything like that, though there was a little bit of grassy material mixed in. Not much, about 8 or 9 grass stems here, which I suspect are brome because it is a grass that is the awnless brome that has some thick stems like this, and that there's a lot of in that area. But there's some other grasses as well. So this is another plant that I got kind of sort out. But really, there are so few pieces of this that it's not nearly as significant for me to try to sort out as learning what this plant is. What is this bark that's used? That's very important. That's a mystery that still needs to be solved. That's very important. And what are these rootlets, right? So the bark and the rootlets are the remaining mysteries to this nest, but now at least I know that this nest is comprised of at least 3 layers of material. Cottonwood leaves, and then the hemp or the fiber bark material. So cottonwood leaves, fiber bark material, and rootlets is the final stage. And it may be actually comprised of 4. It may be cottonwood leaves, thicker bark, thinner bark that could be from a different plant, rootlets, and then the oddball grass stems, the oddball twigs. I'm not so concerned with the oddballs, like I said. So yeah, that's my first nest that I've taken apart, and there's still more to try to figure out about this nest, but I thought I would go ahead and report on it, what I've learned so far, and I'm going to continue all winter working on different nests that I find there, and learn as much as I can about the relationship between the plants and these birds at Spopikimi.